Fisher mentioned, I'm senior fellow at the Conference Board, so I'll pause for translation. I assume we have translation. Maybe not. The words have been translated at any rate. So I have to get rid of this icon on my screen. There we go. Knowledge is, we call it the fourth enterprise resource. All knowledge management consists of, all business management or enterprise management consists of the skillful alignment of four basic resources. The physical resources like plant, equipment, and inventory, the human resources like labor, financial resources, which money or capital we call it in the United States, and then the newest discovery is of intangible resources, which includes things like data, information, knowledge, intelligence. We'll talk a little bit about those in a few minutes. Things like intellectual property, like patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Things like brands and enterprise reputation, and things like communities and networks of people. Knowledge is a valuable yet unseen asset. Knowledge and other intangible assets make up nearly 80% of enterprise value. In my book that Fisher very kindly mentioned, The Value of Knowledge, I present in detail by industry the data of that's shown here in aggregate on this slide. But in aggregate, with all industries put together, these are probably mostly US and European companies, forgive me, but in general, intangible value is now almost 80% of enterprise value. Tangible value, as we measure in financial statements, is only about 21% of economic value. That breakdown of the intangible value includes not what we think of as knowledge, and then other intangibles. And again, this is all detailed in my book in some detail. But so knowledge and intangibles are very large, but they're very invisible. In fact, what is knowledge is a question that many people get. I used to get when I worked in the accounting firms. What is knowledge? And the reason is that most accounting standards, including what the US uses, something called GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. Europe uses something called IFRS, do not adequately measure or even describe intangibles. And it's widely believed that what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So as a result, many executives treat enterprise knowledge as something specialized, something isolated, something mysterious, or even something that's make-believe, that's made up. Therefore, they do not devote sufficient resources to its rigorous management. If they don't believe in it, they can't really focus on it, and they can't really manage it properly. We believe that knowledge should be seen not as something special, and we do not recommend creating new frameworks and metrics for knowledge, but that a more successful outcome results from adapting existing management analytic frameworks and diagnostic tools to knowledge. For example, the value chain, which I learned in business school, is used in manufacturing analysis and strategic planning. So our emphasis is on repurposing, instead of inventing new frameworks for knowledge, we repurpose existing frameworks and metrics and apply those to knowledge. One example that I mentioned is the knowledge value chain. We took the value chain concept and turned it into a framework for knowledge, a new framework for knowledge. It was introduced in 1996. It analyzes knowledge as a manufacturing process. A manufacturing process, as you know, starts with raw materials, it has intermediate products, and then it has finished goods. With the knowledge value chain, the raw materials are data and information. The intermediate products are knowledge and intelligence. And the finished goods are decisions and actions, which then lead to value. The enterprise, as the enterprise defines value, the creation of value, whether it's economic value, societal value, there are different ways to define value. We've been told from our clients that there are other models similar to this, but the KVC model is differentiated. It's different from other knowledge frameworks in two primary ways. Number one, the KVC end product is value as defined by the enterprise. Many of these kinds of models have knowledge as the final product, but we believe that is only an intermediate product to reach then the value as defined by the enterprise. And the second point of differentiation is that the KVC describes the transformations, the actions, the work process, if you will, that's needed to move between each stage. So the yellow words, I don't think they've been translated here, but they're the transformational steps. And I do hope you'll get a chance to see the translated copy of the book. I tried to write the book in a very down-to-earth style, so I think it could be translated fairly easily. So in that model, in our model, and I think in most models, data, information does not equal knowledge. Information is the foundation on which knowledge rests, but the two are very different. And they're related, but they differ in key ways. Each becomes more powerful when they work together, but information is, on the one hand, is inanimate. It's just in a database or a book. Knowledge is organic. Knowledge is human. Information is static. It stays in the same place once you put it there. Knowledge is dynamic. It's always evolving. It's always changing. Information is scalable. We can send information packets around the world at the speed of light, practically instantaneously. Knowledge is very localized. It's really in people's heads. Information is linear and hierarchical. As you know, if you work with data of any kind, it's sequential. But knowledge is networked. It's sort of works, and because it's socialized, it's in human networks, and information, knowledge itself is networked. And to sum up everything, information is explicit. It's on the page, it's in the words in the air, and knowledge is tacit. I believe all knowledge is tacit, and in reading some of the founding fathers and mothers of knowledge, philosophy and science, I believe that they would have agreed with that too. But the KM paradox, the knowledge management paradox, because all true knowledge is by definition human and tacit. As Peter Drucker, one of the founders of knowledge management in the United States, said in 1964, knowledge is a specifically human resource. It's only in people's heads. Once it's translated into information, then it's stored in databases, in books, and documents. So to make knowledge explicit, it must be captured and translated into information. Because knowledge is human, knowledge management must involve managing people and people's behaviors. But traditional KM, much of the KM literature and thinking focuses heavily on managing information technology and content, systems, databases, published materials. While these are valuable resources for managing explicit information, they are not as useful for managing tacit knowledge. And in fact, most knowledge is not captured. There's an old saying that we know far more than we can say, and we say far more than we can write. So I've depicted the concentric ovals on the right-hand side. What we know, let's imagine, is the is the orange oval, the biggest oval. Now, these are not drawn to scale. So what we know is much, 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 much bigger than what we can say. What we can put down in language is much smaller than that. And then what we can write, what we can capture in documents is much smaller than that. So knowledge capturing what we know in our heads and putting it down in some kind of explicit information, that process is slow. It's resource intense. It takes work and resources. And there's a filtration and editing process that goes. And once you winnow down the knowledge that we have into what we write, there's an editing process, a filtering process. And there's also this noise. There's a signal noise that comes in when we translate things down from what we know to what we can write. There's a lot of signal noise that I've described in other lectures. And these obstacles to knowledge capture actually grow with scale. Those problems and challenges get bigger and get worse, more challenging as it grows with what this person or person A knows, person B knows, person C knows. But what we know together is the blue oval is much bigger than all of us. So together we are smarter than any of us individually. Now, because it's slow and the translation process is slow, the human touch is essential. Human touch is an English phrase, English language phrase. It means the personal connection. So to build effective transfers of knowledge, active engagement with both human experts and information is essential. Effective knowledge transfer structures in history and in the world include things like apprenticeships, internships, medical internships, legal clerkships, formal education. I should mention that I went to Yale. Much of what I did at Yale was read books and look at data on the computers, and then talk to people, talk to my peers, talk to my teachers. So it was a combination of human experts and structured information. And with regard to what GO-TKM has identified, mentoring and coaching is key to the transfer of information. I gave a talk earlier to this group, which I think has been recorded and you can probably still access, talking about the problem of transferring expertise when somebody leaves the company, and recommending that there be a transition where there's a mentoring process of an offboarding process when somebody leaves an organization, that their information is captured, their knowledge is captured to some extent in information, and even that they're available for consulting to the organization later on. So the information is captured and the knowledge is actually captured in the form of a relationship with the person that continues. And finally, knowledge sustainability. That's a term that is used in terms of enterprise sustainability a lot here in the United States. A lot of business people are talking about it, but I believe that knowledge sustainability is also an issue. I've had people in workshops mention to me that their knowledge, with whatever they're doing with knowledge, is not sustainable because it takes too much resources or whatever the problem is. So sustainability of knowledge is the key thing, so that these knowledge initiatives don't just become a fad or a fashion, that they become sustainable, they become part of the way an organization behaves and does business. I believe that there are four major characteristics of knowledge, sustainable knowledge initiatives. And these are not necessarily in order of their importance. They're all important. But at the top of this slide, I put leadership, and I do think leadership is of paramount importance, both in terms of engagement with executives in an organization. The leaders of the organization will drive all of the decisions that are made in the rest of the organization and drive the corporate culture. So having active engagement with executives, people up the hierarchy, is terribly important, but also engagement with peers, lateral engagement, and with employees. So really 360-degree engagement with people is very important. Going around the wheel, accountability is very important. A positive return on investment. That's pretty much what my book focuses on: how to build that accountability. And part of the way that I recommend in the book, and anytime I speak to people or work with clients, is that strategic relevance. That's a fancy way of saying that whatever knowledge does and however knowledge is engaged, it has to be solving a business or enterprise problem. It has to have a direct linkage to business value creation. It has to have a direct linkage to the enterprise stakeholders, a term we use a lot in the United States now, which means not just the owners of an enterprise, but its employees, its customers, and society at large. How do they benefit? The strategies of the organization, the needs and metrics of the organization. Knowledge should feed in and support all of those things directly. It shouldn't be separate. Knowledge dies when it becomes something separate. It needs to be integrated and strategically relevant to the business. And then finally, the personal interactions. The human touch is very important to guide people through. I think it's more important than ever, as a matter of fact, now, because there's a proliferation of knowledge, information and content and information tools in organizations. Part of what I do with my clients is I find just what those things are, because those are not counted in financial statements. Often they're not really well accounted for at all. So I start with the census, if you will, an inventory of what the information tools are, and find that a lot of times there are too many pieces of information, too many information tools, and sometimes they conflict. They're not harmonized. So having a personal interaction enables you to harmonize those tools and get those tools working as one to the strategy of the organization. So knowledge resources management is what my firm calls knowledge management. We call it knowledge resources management, KRM. And KRM applies the principles and practices of modern enterprise management to knowledge. My training, as Fisher mentioned, is in management. That's where I come from. I became a user of knowledge, and so I apply my knowledge, my own knowledge of management tools to knowledge principles. My firm is the knowledge agency, as I mentioned, and so we begin really almost every engagement that we do is with an inventory, a counting up, a structured listing and measurement of knowledge, assets, and activities, which is called an inventory. Accounting firms call it an inventory, so that's what we call it, just counting up and identifying what those things are. So that's, I kept my remarks short because I thought we would have sequential translation, but I guess you're getting translated at the same time. So I will probably wind up my comments very soon. I can take any questions in the chat if you've been hearing this. I hope you've been hearing this in Chinese. But there's some other resources that I presented for you here. Let's make knowledge work is my little mantra for my company and my activities. There are 4 resources here that you may want to consult with. One is a knowledge erosion, how to avoid it, which is an article that I wrote after my discussion with Fisher's GO-TKM group back in October. I wrote a blog post about this issue of knowledge erosion. So if that's something that's interesting to you, there's a lot more detail about my 3-step program that I recommended during that talk. Let's Make Knowledge Work. The Knowledge Agency website is indexed there because you can see just generally what we do in general. The book, and I hope you will get a chance to get the book. There are a lot of diagrams and illustrations, but it is in English. But that's a link to the book. You can find out more about that there. And if you'd like to link to me directly on LinkedIn, it's all in English, of course, but if you care to do that, I'd love to catch up with you that way. And that's my link, LinkedIn bio. So those are that's my prepared remarks for today. I'll take any questions or any comments, and I very much appreciate your time and attention, and I hope to see you again soon. And thanks again, Fisher. Thanks again, Min, and thanks, Icy, for the beautiful translation of the slides, as always. Really appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim, for this wonderful sharing. Actually, I fully agree with you that you have this the fourth resource of the enterprise. In the past, we only talk about say people, assets, and then the money and so on. We only talk about these three elements. But now you add the fourth element, which really, very important to many people in the organization, because in the past we only talk about to say three elements, which they always neglect the fourth element. But in reality, it exists. You cannot imagine a company, an organization, just have people, just have the assets, just have the money, you can do everything. So no way, it's not that way. So yeah, I fully agree with you for that. This is really very new perspective for everyone, especially for many of these enterprise or startups or many senior executives in the corporations. They need to think about how this the fourth element will help them in their daily management as well. So this is really very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. I can elaborate that on you want. I don't know what your time schedule is like, but I can chat on anything you want. But
you can. You still have 5 minutes. You can get an 11.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because many people in the United States, at least, were under the sway of Adam Smith. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, but all economic students study that. It talks about land, labor, and capital, the three forces. And the idea, I went in writing my book, I went back to Adam Smith and I read his work again. And he really doesn't mention knowledge. He mentions expertise a little bit, but it really is a new idea. I think it comes, I believe, and I actually have a history of the idea in my book. I go back to Socrates, and back in Socrates' era, that wasn't really, knowledge was assumed to have value. But for management people, I think it arises in the 60s. It's all in my book, but in the 1960s, there started to be an awareness that there was this new resource, the fourth resource. And but we don't really understand it. It's not captured in our financial statements, and it's not really part of our formal systems. And I neglected to mention in my slide, it's getting bigger all the time. That 79% is growing over time, so it's getting more important. Our economy is really based on it, and yet our accounting systems don't count it. So yeah, executives aren't really aware of it sometimes. We don't really have the tools, and I hope to be part of a team, maybe working with you folks, and to develop these tools of capturing what knowledge is. It's so important, but it's so intangible that we sometimes have trouble just getting our arms around it. So it's not something I learned at Yale, by the way. They didn't really. I had one professor that sort of knew about this, but they're getting there. Yeah, it's all new stuff.
I'm glad that you invite this. Yeah, I'm very glad that you invite this.
Thanks.
Great. Okay. So and also, Tim, I also realized that you see, for this the fourth element, it seems very difficult for many companies to identify in their balance sheet, in the financial statement, and so on. So what do you think, in your personal opinions, is there any changes or trend for us to see that will happen in the next few years?
The accounting firms that I was with, there is some discussion about how to handle this. There are some exceptions. Not to get too much into details, but when a company is exchanged in a transaction, a company is purchased by another company, there is something called goodwill that goes to the balance sheet, but it's a very inexact measurement. There've been some. There are many people that are unhappy about this, and I know there's some. I'm not directly plugged in with what the there's a group called the AICPA in the United States. That's the policy making group. I'm not sure what they're doing, but I know there have been complaints or remarks made that they need to do a better job on this. I should really get more myself more involved in that, because it's a real need. What we do is outside of that. We sort of create our own thing called the knowledge balance sheet, but it's not part of the financial balance sheet. So you can go to the largest knowledge-based companies. I did an experiment recently with Amazon, which is really founded on knowledge, and knowledge doesn't appear on their balance sheet. These assets that I mentioned in the 4 asset slides, none of them appear on the balance sheet. So even the most knowledge-driven companies don't really account for that. My personal view is that not only is it not accounted for, but that accounts for some of the wild swings in valuations. For example, in the United States, we're dealing with the cryptocurrency meltdown of FTX and these other companies. They're all intangible assets, but because we have no tools to measure them, they had wildly inflated asset values, and a lot of people lost a lot of money, real money, when that collapsed, because we need the tools, desperately need the tools to measure these things. In the accounting profession so far, some of them are my good friends, but they're not really doing a very good job at it so far, just the way it's set up. So there's a professor at NYU who has written about this. Has been written about it before me. I didn't invent this idea, but it's all documented in my book. So
great. Thank you, Tim, for your wonderful sharing. I really learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. That's saying something. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much, Tim. Have a good evening. Okay. Of course,
you
can also join.
Thanks so much. I hope to see the rest of this on recording. I'm going to go have fun with my family, but I hope to see the recording of this. You're recording.
You will have all the recordings. You will have all the recordings.
Great. Thank you so much. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay.